Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Gonna get started here in a moment. I know it's a little odd to see me on camera, number one, and then number two, doing the stream without the code editor up. So today I want to do something a little different. I want to talk a little bit more about the mindset and the way you should kind of embrace and think about projects before you actually build that application or software or whatever it is that you're looking to do, and talk about the three things that fall into every project that you want to prepare for prior to typing out your first line of code. And it doesn't necessarily matter what the framework is or what exactly you're using or what project you're looking to ultimately code. Every project you want to make sure that you kind of have certain things defined before you jump in. The more you prepare in the beginning, you don't want to overthink it, but the more you prepare in the beginning, you're setting yourself up for success. So want to kind of talk about that a little bit. And this is diving further into one of the videos that I created earlier this week that kind of talked about the three steps inside of every coding project that you want to make sure that you include. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today versus just jumping into the editor. And we may jump into the editor later with the actual project. But for right now, let's kind of talk about getting our minds right first. All right, so I want to tell you something that most developers don't realize. And it's that most coding projects don't fail because you don't have the capacity or the skill set to know how to code. They fail much earlier in the process than that. They fail way before you write a single line of code because the inputs you choose, the reason they fail way before you write that single line of code is because you haven't actually determined what inputs you should choose. And that's going to quietly decide whether that project is going to stand the test of time or whether you're going to fail somewhere before the project is actually complete. And when I say input, I'm not necessarily referring to a form with the input to capture information. I mean something that everything that you have to commit to prior to writing that first line of code. What's going on, my friend? I appreciate you stopping by per usual. So the things that you want to think about before you actually start to write code in the input phase is your scope, your expectations, your tech stack, your time, your energy, your current skill level. You see, most beginners don't quite You see, a lot of the times early in the process, we don't quit because coding is impossible. Sure, you can code a to-do app. Sure, you can code a simple blog, CRUD application that has the ability to create, update, and delete a blog. But yeah, something a little different today. I hope you enjoy it and you take something from it. I know that this may not necessarily be everyone's cup of tea, but we're looking to do something a little different today. So what I'm ultimately looking to do is step away from the text editor and kind of slow down a little bit. And I want to talk a little bit about what input decisions really are and how they can quietly kill your project if you don't have everything planned out and in place before you actually start building. Because I can assure you, no matter what you're coding, no matter the framework, no matter what the end goal of the application is, every project is going to have three patterns or a three-step pattern. It's going to include the input, the transformation, and the output. And first, I want to talk about the input because the input is going to be everything that you're feeding into that project. So these are the three key components or key patterns that's going to be in every project that you create: an input, a transformation, and an output. So first I want to talk about the input and what exactly goes into that. And I'm going to keep it simple because I don't want to overcomplicate this and I don't want you to walk away feeling more confused than what you are when you stop and started to watch this content. All right, so when I say input, what exactly am I talking about? So the input of the project is basically we're going to answer three questions. Number one, uh, yeah. The first question we're going to answer with an input is what are we taking in? The second question is what exactly do we control? And that third question is can we keep it realistic? All right. So let's start with the first one. What exactly are we taking in? See, a lot of the times in this step, you may think that I'm referring to we're building a to do application, or we're building a habit tracker, or we're building a dashboard. And yes, ultimately that may be the end goal, but the truth is that we're taking in way more information than just an idea. You see, you also got to keep in mind that you're taking in the complexity of the said idea, the tech stack that's going to be required, the number of features that you eventually want to add into the project. These are the expectations that you're going to have in your head that you kind of want to lay out prior to actually building the project so that you have a real understanding of what exactly you need to get built and ultimately what the end game or the MVP of this particular project is going to look like. I appreciate it. Those are the components that's going to actually make up the real input. You see, when I first started coding, I did what most beginners do, and I'd hype myself up about an idea, picture all of these additional features that I want to add to it, tell myself that I'm going to get this thing done and I'm going to show it off to the world. And halfway through the project, I got stuck because I was either over my head trying to build something more complicated, or, and this is what took place more often than not, I didn't have a clear guidance or vision of what exactly it was that I was looking to get done. You see, some of those things that you tend to put the cart before the horse, if you will, is this application has to have authentication. So I'm going to use Better Off or Off.js or Clerk or one of the other ones, right? I want to have user profiles. I want to have this profile page that looks very similar to whatever application that I might be thinking of in the moment. It'll have to take payments. So we certainly want to use Stripe, and I want to be able to do credit cards and Cash App and on-demand payments, etc. I want to make sure that I have analytics so I know how frequently the application is being clicked on, where's the traffic source coming from, where should I improve my SEO, where should I invest marketing, etc. And last and certainly not least is you want it to look clean, you want it to look polished, you want it to look like something that was professionally done. And all of these things are great, and you certainly want to include these in the process of building an application. But if you think about it, a lot of this stuff should come further down the line, especially with someone that's just getting started with learning how to code. Yeah, no editor today, my friend. Just kind of talking through some mindset stuff. And this is a continuation on the video that I did earlier in the week, kind of talking about why we don't finish our coding applications and why we always restart, and kind of how to break that endless cycle of continually restarting projects without actually spending and taking the time to finish them. this is something I wanted to kind of dive into. I had some questions about it. So I thought this would be a pretty good platform to answer those questions and additional questions that may come in while we are communicating in a live environment. So that's the reason I took this approach today and did something a little different. So, all of those things are cool features and additional things that you want to have inside of the project. But if you notice, none of those things are the actual core system of the project itself. Those are additional features and additional quote unquote pleasantries that you can add inside of the project to give it additional life and improve the user experience, but they do not impact the actual system or the core foundation of the app. And if you think about it as a beginner, you're wanting to add authentication, user profiles, payments, analytics, have this very clean layout. All of those things are great. But when you're just getting started, you probably haven't even finished a CRUD application, or you probably can't write the functionality with APIs from beginning to end with a CRUD app, connecting it to local storage or connecting it to a cloud database, let alone looking to add in authentication, user profiles, payments, etc. Those things are a lot more complex. And the more that you add onto yourself before you're actually ready to implement these features, you're really just setting yourself up for failure at that point. And so if you think about it, you know, in the beginning stages, I hadn't even finished a CRUD application. I couldn't comfortably write a CRUD app with the appropriate API endpoints or server actions or Express server, whatever it was I was using as my backend endpoint. In the beginning, I wasn't comfortable with doing that, but I had my eyesight set on adding all these additional features. And then as you're starting to code these things and you don't take the proper steps to implement them with the appropriate expectation and preparation up front, your project is doomed to fail because you're biting off more than you can chew. So, based upon these things, I didn't necessarily have a coding problem. I had an input problem. I was feeding my project with the unlimited scope, no constraints, and unrealistic expectations. Because again, I was asking myself to do something that I wasn't comfortable with doing, all because I wanted to build this fancy project and show it off to the world. When I really should have took a step back and better prepared myself in this input phase so that I knew exactly what it was that I was building and things that I didn't know how to build. I would take the time to learn instead of trying to implement it on the fly, getting overwhelmed, adding to anxiety, and ultimately not finishing my project. And again, finding myself in that endless loop of starting and restarting projects constantly. Yep. Yeah. Look, I was no different than anyone else, man. I hustled backwards, if you will, starting with things that I shouldn't have when I really should have just been focused on the core functionality of the project first before I started worrying about all of these additional features that really didn't matter. So let's start with a simple example that most of us have built, especially if you are a beginner and you're just getting started. Let's start with a simple habit tracker. Sounds pretty simple, right? With a habit tracker, if I could talk this morning, you really are just looking to capture the habit, which would be your create portion of it. The update will be to either say, hey, I completed the habit, which will probably be a Boolean to toggle it true or false. And then you'll also include the ability to delete it so that if you no longer want to have this habit stored within your data storage, whether it be local storage or in the cloud, you have the ability to delete it. And of course, you have the ability to get all habits that you created. So that's the simple foundation of this application. But a lot of the times when we're first starting out, we're thinking about with a habit tracker, I want to have streaks so that I can keep track of how long we're actually doing this habit and sending out notifications and badges and different things that go along with the streak itself, which is a very cool feature, but it takes away from the core of the actual project itself. The next one is I want to have charts. I want to be able to visually see graphs and different things that show, hey, we're doing a good job with our habit. We're staying on top of things we need to be on top of. You know, that visual reminder is a motivator, and it's something that you would want to include in the habit tracker, but it's not necessarily required, especially up front. You know, progress graphs, you know, these are, you know, aesthetically pleasing. They add to the end user experience, they enhance the overall user interface. But if you think about it, they do not play a key part in the actual habit tracker itself. You know, you want graphs. Again, progress graphs are important. They play a big part in the actual application itself. They enhance the user experience. They serve as a motivator. You know, these are statistically proven facts, which is why you always see those in certain applications. However, we're just getting started. We're just building the application. We're too early to want to add these additional features. We want to stick to the core foundation of the application. I want to add notifications to be able to send something to the user to remind them that, hey, you need to pick it up on the streak, or hey, great job with the streak. Why don't you keep it going? I want to add themes. You want to be able to set different color schemes based upon the user preference. You know, this is something that enhances the user experience. There's going to be a customer seg base, or a segment of customers that prefer to be able to capture different, be able to modify the theme based upon their preference. However, we're not at that point in the project where we should be concerned with the actual theme. I want to add social features. Want to be able to implement this in my Facebook, my Instagram, my Twitter, my TikTok, my YouTube. You know, those features, be able to share this with someone else, be able to invite someone in on my habit, be able to share with the world, you know, where I am from a street perspective, so I can get that additional encouragement by others and potentially invite them to the application. So, you know, look, these are great ideas, especially if you're building a SaaS project. You would want to include these things because they serve multiple purposes. We're just a little early in including it when we're just in the input phase. I want weekly analytics so I know where my data source is coming from. You know, how's my SEO working? Am I targeting the right audience? Am I capturing the audience that I thought I would? Am I getting a certain audience that I need to start catering to? Is my users viewing this on their phone versus the website? What is their experience on a website? What is their experience on the phone? All of these things play a part into a web app or application development, or software development for that matter. But again, we're in the input stage. And if we're trying to add these things in this early in the process, we're setting ourselves up for failure. Because really, if you think about it, you're no longer building a habit tracker application at this point. You're building an actual startup. This is turned into an actual business, which is great. And ultimately, that could be your end goal. But you got to start with the actual foundation, the system, the flow of the project first before you start adding in those additional features. So that's why you always want to start with that very first question of what are we taking in? Not the dream app, not the fantasy version, not what we envision as a finished product, but what are we actually taking in and what is the actual reality of this project? Then you want to consider that second question. What exactly do we control? A lot of times in the beginning, we tend to stress about endless amount of things that really don't have a huge impact of the project itself. We tend to stress about things that we can't actually control, and we completely ignore the things that we actually do control. So when you think about what you actually do control, here's what you do control. Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. When you think about the things that are inside of your control and outside of your control, you technically don't control, how fast you progress as a developer. Yes, you can get better at coding, spending more time actually coding itself, but that's not everything that goes into becoming a developer. You don't control whether everything is going to work instantly. Sometimes those things take time. You have to bring a lot of different dependencies together. Technologies have to talk to each other. You have to be able to integrate them based upon the application cores, whatever it is that you're doing. You don't control how fast that process is. You just control making sure that it actually works. You don't control whether your motivation stays high every day. Again, there are outside factors that play a part into your motivation as a human being. And if you're in the process of learning and you don't have 8 to 12 to whatever amount of hours to solely dedicate to that, and even if you do, there are going to be other things that contribute to your motivation. So when you are looking to sit down and start coding, that's going to be impacted based upon how you're feeling, what you have going on, and just where you are in the process of actually coding itself. And you don't control whether coding feels hard or not. There's going to be a learning curve with everyone. It's going to be challenging to everyone. How difficult it is for you versus someone else, you don't necessarily control that. All you can control is how better you get at it, right? But some things that you actually do control along the way is you control the size of the project. You don't want to make a project too complex, not in the beginning, especially if you haven't or you barely finishing your very first projects on your own without a tutorial. Don't bite off more than you can chew, because ultimately you're just going to create a level of angst that's going to contribute to the lack of confidence. And eventually, you're going to want to step away from that project and find yourself back in that endless loop of restarting or maybe even quitting coding altogether. You control the complexity of the project. Again, if it's just a habit tracker, let's keep it simple. We don't need to have all of these fancy APIs and making all of these fancy requests. Let's just keep it simple. Let's make sure that it can do the things that we want it to do, that it functions, that we have a good, clean working project. We can always make enhancements later, add features later, based upon our skill set and based upon whatever it is that's going to enhance the customer experience. You control which tech stack you use. Again, there's no perfect tech stack. Pick the one that you're most comfortable with, the one that you know how to get things done with. Down the line, you can change tech stacks based upon your project that you're looking for. But as you become more comfortable with coding, changing tech stacks won't be so scary because you're really just learning syntax, and a lot of things work the exact same way. They just require a different character versus, Next.js requires this character, and, Boot, Spring, or I'm drawing a blank, Express may require a few additional steps, wherein a React Next.js project requires something different. You could figure out those intricacies based upon the documentation. You control what's inside of your scope. You want to make sure that you're doing things that you're comfortable doing. If you're not comfortable with doing something, don't add it to the early stages of your project. Add it as an eventual feature that you'll add in later. Look at something like this YouTube channel or any YouTube channel. If you notice, the like button started out in one phase where you'll just click the like button and you automatically get a response back that, hey, this video is liked by you. You no longer have the ability to continue to like it. The only thing you could do at this point is dislike it. You may be able to uncheck it to not have a like on it at all. I can't remember, but the point of it is that it originally started out with a simple icon that you'll click on and it worked. Now, if you notice with the YouTube like button, and you can go ahead and like this video to kind of see what it looks like, there's an animation that goes along with it. That's an enhancement. They didn't include that animation in the beginning. They wanted to make sure that it actually worked, that the like was working as intended, the count was working as intended, it was attached to a user ID as it was intended, and that user, that content creator that created that video, they received the recognition for the like, and now they're getting the additional boost or whatever YouTube does with the algorithm based upon the like. Now that we have the core functionality out of the way, now let's focus on adding in some additional features. I think it does like a little airplane transition with a little celebration that you liked it now. So that's part of that like experience. But again, it didn't start that way. It was an enhancement that was added later on. And they didn't include anything that wasn't outside of their scope to begin with. Not to say that they couldn't have done this earlier on in the process. I know those developers have the skill set to do it, but it just wasn't something that was of the utmost importance in the beginning. In the beginning, it was more important to make sure that everything worked, make sure that the analytics were being captured properly, make sure that the user to video relationship was proper, making sure that the video was receiving the appropriate recognition. And after all of those things are cared for, now we can start to add in some of the pleasantries that enhance the user experience. And you control whether you simplify or you overcomplicate your project. If it is just intended to be a habit tracker or a note application, just keep it to that. We don't need to have so many different features in the beginning that's going to make this more complicated to code. We just want to keep it simple in the beginning so that we can get a working finished project. And then eventually we'll add those additional things on that'll enhance the user experience. And I get it because I remember when I first started out, this is the step or the phase where I personally lost a lot because I really wanted to build this SaaS multi-tenant project where that I could expose to the world, have users sign up, have them sign up for my premium plan feature through Stripe. I collect a small portion of that based upon their signing up and signing on to the subscription-based portion of the project when I haven't even built the core project itself first. I was still dreaming of building these things out, but still watching YouTube videos of other content creators building similar projects, wanting to emulate what they do, thinking that, hey, if I just follow this project, I'll have the same thing and I'll be able to customize it for me. But it doesn't necessarily work like that. Seeing what everyone else was doing is extremely motivating, but I couldn't allow that to dictate where I was in the journey, nor should I say, hey, I'm just going to do what they're doing and I'm going to get to where I want to go. Because again, it doesn't work like that. Sure, you may finish that project, but remember, you have to deploy it. You have to secure that application. You have to set in rate limits. You have to debug. You have to care for different things that come up once you take an app from a personal project to a production that a YouTube tutorial just necessarily won't show you. And if you rely on someone else to show you how to build your application, you're really setting yourself up for failure. So, what did I do in this process early on when I found myself dreaming and wanting to do what I seen others do? I ignored where I was in my coding journey and my level of expertise because I didn't have the skill set to do what it was that I sought out to do. I ignored the amount of time that it took in order to build this project because, hey, I'm a working adult. I have a traditional 9 to 5. I have a family, I have a wife, I have other things that I do outside of just coding. This is something that I have to set aside and make time to do. And if I'm doing too much or asking too much of myself in the beginning before I'm actually ready to sit down and put my fingers to the keyboard, then I'm really setting myself up for failure. I ignored my experience. I ignored the fact that a lot of these things that I wanted to add in, I had never touched before. I never integrated into a project. I never set up an account. I never knew what the process was to have my own personal API versus using a public API that's open for the public. All of these things I didn't take into consideration when I was envisioning this multi-product, this multi-tenant SaaS product that I wanted everyone that was available to sign up for. I ignored these things. So what I found was that I didn't finish what it was that I set out to do. And back then I would get discouraged and feel as if I wasn't good enough simply because I wasn't able to finish what it was that I set out to do. So now, based upon everything that I just mentioned, if we go back to breaking it down to the steps that I'm referring to on screen, the mindset that we need to have, what were my inputs? It was a huge scope. Let's just be honest. I'm trying to code a multi-tenant full stack application with payment integration, with the core functionality that I want, all of these additional features, multiple themes, etc. That's a very, very big scope for someone that's just getting started, that has never coded a full stack application without following the guidance of someone else, or can barely get through coding a CRUD application on their own. You're asking to implement a lot. So your input is going to be a very, very huge scope. You're going to have some form of advanced tech stack. It's not just going to be a single tech stack like Next.js, Tailwind, and whatever database cloud storage and maybe an ORM to kind of help integrate with that. That's very, very simple. Based upon what I was looking for, I probably would need to implement some form of an admin dashboard, middleware to kind of help with the multi-tenant access, making sure you have the appropriate user to habit or note, whatever other model relationship that I needed, so that all of the habits or notes or whatever it was that I wanted that were created by that user were assigned to that specific user. This is a very, very big scope and an advanced stack that I was looking to do. And I know a lot of times we see these videos on YouTube from other content creators. A lot of these content creators have been coding for years. And yes, it may be quote unquote beginner friendly, but should this be your very first project that you start with, I'll kind of let you make that determination. My best suggestion to you would be no, but I don't want to tell someone what they can and can't do. Didn't have any clear reasoning behind what it was that I wanted to do this other than it being a passion project. And I get it. That's how most projects tend to start out, as a passion project, and they tend to grow into something more than that. But again, we got to have a starting point somewhere. And if the starting point is us trying to build a multi-tenant SaaS application before we are comfortable with a CRUD app, we probably are setting ourselves up for failure. And then the last thing, and probably most importantly, that I was missing was patience. I'm not a very, I've developed patience in life, and I'm sure a lot of you are like me out there. But, if you don't have a whole lot of time and this is something that you're working on and you have conflicting priorities or things that you're trying to get accomplished, you don't have a whole lot of patience when it comes to learning small details or learning things that you may not be 100% familiar with. So if you don't have the patience and you don't have a whole lot of time, you're very structured and you're trying to build something that's very, very complex, you're ultimately setting yourself up for failure, because you probably aren't going to finish what it is that you set out to do, because you just don't have the time, nor do you have the patience to sit down and really read the documentation and learn how to integrate and secure your application so that it does become something that you ultimately can put out to the world to interact and experience. So these are the things that I really kind of recognized in my input stage when I went back and looked at it, was that I had a big scope, I had an advanced stack, I didn't have any clear reason, and I had absolute no patience to learn and to build out what it was that I said I was going to set to do. And then, if you think about it over the weeks, as I kept track of a lot of these things, and I can show you those old notebooks, I really found myself in kind of a phase week upon week. That first week, I'm extremely excited. I got a brand new repo. It's clean, no code. The sky's the limit. I could do whatever it is that I set out to do. And then, by week 2, I'm starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed because I'm so focused on the aesthetics of the project, being able to add all of these additional features and have it work the way I intended for it to work, instead of actually making sure it's functional and secure each step along the way. Starting to feel a little bit of overwhelmed, starting to get some anxiety, starting to not feel so sure about myself, and probably in the early stages of restarting, but I just haven't realized it just yet. By week 3, I'm Googling errors nonstop. Now we have the luxury of using AI to kind of help with some of this, but I'm a old school traditional guy and still like to use Google to kind of help with things. I find it very useful, and it kind of challenges me mentally in a way that AI kind of takes some of that challenge out of the coding and the software development process. So, but that's just my personal opinion. You could do whatever works for you. And then by week 4, this project is getting kicked to the curb. It's time to do something else because I'm not motivated. I don't have clear direction. I'm overwhelmed based upon what it is that I said I was going to build and what I'm actually building. So, at this point, it's just time to move on. And this is that endless cycle that you always find yourself in, abandoning that project, starting under repo, and feeling inspired again because I'm jumping back in it and I'm starting a new repo with a modified name because the project name that I had before I can no longer use, and I'm just going to start over and try to build the exact same thing. And yes, I have a better starting point because I've done some things, but ultimately my focus wasn't where it needed to be. So this input phase wasn't as valuable and structured as it needed to be. And I find this endless cycle, and I'm just repeating it over and over and over again. And I guarantee you that this sounds familiar to a lot of you, because I know a lot of you have done the exact same thing before. And if you think about it, it wasn't so much that I had a problem with being motivated, because I would sit down, I would code the time that I said I would. I enjoy the coding process. So it wasn't so much that I didn't have a motivation. It wasn't that I wasn't disciplined to do it, because when I said I was going to do it, I actually did it. It was more so of an input problem. And I chose inputs that were not controllable, and I expected success anyway. So look, if those things sound familiar, you don't have a problem with motivation. You don't have a problem with discipline. That's an input problem. And I was choosing inputs that were not controllable, and I expected success anyway. And that's just not being realistic. So before you start a project, you don't want to ask, is this cool? Will people like this? Is this the right trendy feature? This is what the most recent or the application that I have has. That I want to add this feature. You want to ask, is this controllable? Is this something that I'm familiar with? What role does this play in the core foundation of the project? Which would kind of help guide you the decision on whether you should even add this to the project or not. Is this something that that third question you would probably want to ask, is this something realistic for me right now? Or is this something that I should look to add in later on? Not is this impressive, not if is this will this go viral, will this help me sell more apps? Yeah, eventually, sure. But right now, we don't need to be concerned with the application going viral or the website blowing up. We need to be more so concerned with getting a working foundation off the ground with the core features first. And then we can focus on adding additional features in a later step. So I would challenge you to ask yourself while you're in this input phase is ask yourself, is this a real ask yourself, is this a real legit if I could talk today, ask yourself, is this a realistic project for me based upon my skill set? Obviously you always want to do something to challenge yourself, so I'm not going to say that just do the things that you could do because otherwise you'll never grow, but you want to pick things that might be a step, maybe two steps above your current skill set. A realistic project is going to have constraints, it's going to have boundaries, it's going to have a clear done state, a clear finish line, so you know where you're starting and you know where you're ultimately going to go. A realistic project does not require you to magically transform into a better developer or become someone that you're not already are. That's asking yourself to do a little bit more than what you may be capable of at this stage in your developer journey. And you want to continue to build compound interest every day from coding. The more you code, you're getting better and better and better at it. Once you begin to ship application, you put it out there for the web or for someone to consume, they're going to find bugs, errors are going to come up. You want to get into the habit of being able to identify those, make changes, make it better, and improve upon that model versus you trying to live up to someone else's standards and do something that someone else can do when you don't have the skill set to do it on your own. So you'll want to be realistic in this phase of the process and make sure that you're setting yourself up for failure. So if you wanted to build a to-do list application, some unrealistic things to add early on is authentication or multiple boards, being able to have a Kibana board with a to-do list, a completed and a pending column. All of those things are great and they serve a purpose. And eventually that could be something to work towards. But in the beginning, let's just keep it to a simple to-do list application. Having animations on refresh or being able to do drag and drop. These things are great additional features they add to the end user experience. It expands the scope of potential clients that you can have. And again, this could eventually turn into a SaaS, but first it needs to start as a to-do list application where you can create, read, update, and delete to-dos and make changes to those to-dos based upon whatever it is that you have going on and based upon what's completed and what's not. Being able to have various themes, that's something that we're all used to and we certainly appreciate. But again, we're just starting out with this application. We don't need to be so concerned with being able to modify the theme right now. Let's just focus on getting a working application and allow that to be the foundation, and additional features can be added in later on. And being able to share and work with multiple teams, that's going to require a real-time database. So nothing wrong with having a real-time database. There's a lot of good ones out there. However, having multiple users creates additional complexities. And if you don't know how to set it up for just a single user, we certainly shouldn't be focused on adding multiple users. A realistic approach to a to-do list application would be more so of having one to-do list, having the name of that to-do, the status of it, and maybe a delete button. And of course, that status button allowing you to toggle whether that to-do is complete or not. Being able to add an item, being able to add to-dos into that list, that's very important. I would think so, and I hope you do as well. Being able to show that item on screen or in the list or wherever it is that you want the data to be displayed, that's going to be extremely important to include. So let's make sure that we have that capability as a realistic input expectation. And then finally, being able to delete them. Sounds familiar? CRUD. Let's keep it simple. We don't necessarily want to focus on all of those additional features right now. At this stage, in the input stage, the core functionality is the only thing that we're concerned with. If we wanted to build a calorie tracker, that's something that falls into that beginner project umbrella, but can quickly take off and become complex depending upon your motivation behind wanting to build this. If you are following My Fitness Pal, or that's a website that you want to emulate, it's probably best to start with the ability to track your macros and not worry so much about everything that goes along with it. When you start concerning yourself with the charts, that's going to be a bit much to want to include in the beginning. When you're worried about defining the actual macros itself, the protein, carb, fat, sodium, sugar, etc., all of those things are great things to add in, great features down the road, but it shouldn't be a part of that core functionality just yet. Detailed analysis, yes, that's included in My Fitness Pal, and if that's your end goal, there's a point in the process when we want to include those things, but in the beginning, not just yet. Integrating AI. Yes, AI is everywhere. It has its place. You certainly want to have it in your application, especially if you go production grade. It's only going to add to the user experience because users are starting to expect that now, if you will. But in the beginning stages, let's not be concerned with adding in AI, as AI is a little more complex. It takes a little more skill to get there. And as a beginner, in the input phase, we're not quite ready to integrate that into the application just yet. Something that's going to be a little bit more realistic for that calorie tracker is to be able to enter a number, be able to store a number, and show a total. I guarantee you there's enough complexity in just those three things inside of this where it will keep you busy, it will challenge you, and it will guide you enough to where you can have a realistic finish, quote unquote, to this project. Being able to enter in a number of calories that you took, being able to show that number on screen, and now to be able to add those numbers up that you have for thus said day and give a total. That's going to be something that's pretty complex, and I guarantee you it's enough to challenge you, to keep you going, and to give you a pretty cool application once you're done. And then once you have that out of the way and you've got the realistic expectation that you want, then you could begin to add on additional features. But remember, you want to go for early wins because that's what's going to contribute to your motivation. That's what's going to help keep you going. That motivation is going to keep you consistent. The days that you don't feel like showing up, you're going to feel proud of yourself because of a job well done. And the days that you weren't going to open up that laptop or turn on your desktop to start coding, because of all the wins that you had and the momentum that you built, you're going to want to keep going because you know that that's ultimately what's going to contribute to your success. You see, that consistency is what's going to help you finish a project. Yeah, being motivated plays a part, but you always see that you want to be disciplined, which is going to mean that you're going to have to be consistent. And that's really what's going to help you finish a project. A lot of times we think that motivation is what keeps us going, and motivation is temporary. You want something that is long lasting and something that is actually going to help you show up even when you don't feel motivated. And that's that discipline that you need in order to be successful. So I'll give you a quick, simple example of that. Two beginners are starting to build an application. The first developer is going to say, I'm building a full social media platform, something similar to Instagram. And yes, that is a very cool thing to want to build. And I'm looking forward to seeing the finished product. But please keep in mind, Instagram has a lot of complexity, a lot of moving parts. And if you're trying to build something similar to that, and you don't have a good foundation or a good background behind you, you're probably setting yourself up for failure. Developer B, or the second developer, comes out and says, I'm building a simple posting app where a user can type, save, and delete it. Now, who do you think is going to have a finished product? This developer that says they're going to build an Instagram clone application, or this developer that says, I'm going to build this simple post application that allows users to input text, save it, update it, and delete it? I can assure you developer B is going to be that developer that's going to finish because they're building something that's a little more practical and realistic. They're not trying to build something that they may not have the skill set to build just yet. And it's not so much that they couldn't actually do it if they sat down and mapped it out and get there, because ultimately that social media application is just a CRUD app. However, it does have additional features, and usually what draws us to websites are those additional features, not just the actual core functionality of the application that we're looking to utilize or looking to build. So, with this input phase, I want you to take away three things and always ask these three questions. What are we taking in? What do we actually control? And what can we keep realistic? If you ask these three questions before you begin to code out any project in this initial phase, I guarantee you, you're going to find yourself more successful and finishing more projects than you were previously. And you're going to start to move away from so many restarts of projects and so many empty and unfinished repos that you probably have in your GitHub right now. So the next time you get ready to start a project, I want you to slow down. I want you to be honest with yourself. And I want you to choose your inputs that give you a realistic chance to win. The future you is going to appreciate that, because once you actually finish and you add additional features, it's going to be a level of confidence and success and enthusiasm that comes along with that. Those are going to be the little things that's going to help keep you going, along with being consistent and disciplined. So, the next step in the mindset that I want to talk about is the transformation phase. And this is about what exactly your application does, how to think about the logic without panicking or feeling overwhelmed or getting that sense of anxiety, how to define the rules so your application feels predictable and stable, if you will. And that's where we actually improve as a developer, not trying things and just failing, but trying things, seeing it through one step at a time, and then adding on the next thing once we've seen it through and we're not trying to do too many things at once.